how do I advance the slides?
You tell me to advance.
Thank you. Thanks, Laura. Thanks, Stephanie, for the invite today. Pleased to be here today in a beautiful setting. I'm from Delaware, down from Delaware, but I've lived in all 4 states of the basin at one time or another. I was born in Philadelphia, Port Richmond, about a quarter mile from the river. My father told me we used to get out to the coal ports right along the river near the Betsy Ross. And then I grew up in Pennsauken, New Jersey. Another about a half mile from the river. I grew up playing ice hockey there when it was cold. And I just remember the river going down. There was a black river, there were oil spills, the fish had stuff on them, and it wasn't a good situation in the late 70s. And then went to school, and now I live in Delaware. But you know, I went to Boy Scout camp up in Indian Ridge, New York, up near Rockland. There's a little church there, Roscoe, and have fond memories of the Catskills. So what I want to talk about today is something called ecological economics, and how it's really vital to invest in this asset that we have called the Delaware River. And I think we can prove that this morning. Let's look at the numbers. So a few years ago, we collaborated with Cornell, the 4 land-grant institutions in the United States. Cornell, Rutgers, Penn State, and University of Delaware. Worked with my colleague, Dr. Jessica Sanchez, who's here today at the Delaware Basin Commission. And we compiled a lot of data on the Delaware River Basin, put a report card. So all the information I'm going to talk about today actually has its foundation working with these great higher institutions, higher learning that we have in the 4 states. So the Delaware Basin is actually comes out of the U.S. Constitution. We have a federalist-style government here in the United States, right? It's shared power between the federal and state government. And that's the way the Delaware River Basin Commission is built. It's a shared power system. And it's a system that really works when you do it right. Back in '61, JFK was convinced to sign the DRBC compact by the governor of Pennsylvania, Governor Lawrence, so that the state of New York would work with the 3 lower states to share the water with regards for political boundaries. It's really a global model. I'm in the water business at the university, and it really is a global model. People come from all over the world and emulate this system. They've done it in Korea, South Korea, and Australia. It's 4 states, 24 counties, 800 municipalities, there's 25 federal agencies, there's 25 congressmen, and 8 U.S. senators that share the governance. So back in '61, Congress, this is front page news in the New York Times, Congress passed the DRBC compact, and if we look at the next slide, they did it very quickly. It went to the House of Representatives, and then it went to the U.S. Senate, and then it went to the President's desk. And back then, they did things very quickly when they wanted to do it that way. And they did it. The headlines were about economic development. It was an economic development and an environmental issue, the creation of the DRBC compact. So these businesses, you might recognize them, the Guggenheim, Boeing down where I am. All these businesses rely solely on the water of the Delaware Basin. And so the river is one of the few things that joins the states together besides our sports teams. So if you go down to Citizens Bank Park in Philadelphia to see the Phillies, or to go to Yankee Stadium, there's a good chance you're drinking water out of the same river, the Delaware River. And if you go to Liberty Bell or to the Empire State Building, that's Delaware River water they're drinking. Creole crowns, another great industry in Easton. Next slide. Yeah, they all depend on the Delaware Basin, that's for sure. Right, so water quality's been improving. I mean, the Lehigh River is one of the largest tributaries. Comes in at Easton, and this is a dissolved oxygen graph. I know we have the science, so we're comfortable with that. The DO levels were close to 0 during the '60s, and you can see they improved, and they mostly meet the standard, which is that red line now. The Lehigh was a dead river if you looked at the old newspaper headlines. Now it's back. And all that happened while the DRBC compact, the Clean Water Act came in the '70s. All these governance structures were set up over the last half century, and I believe they're working. The evidence is they're working. American shadow coming back, they are back. Bald eagles, nesting pairs. It's pretty common now to see a bald eagle. There's even a nest in South Philadelphia at the Navy Yard a few years ago. I took a little canoe trip at the DRBC Sojourn 2 years ago in June. Down there, Bushkill, we rounded the bend and saw these, I thought they were toy boats. The kids' boats that you see, 2 foot long, just going in semicircles, and they were American shad. They had just spawned, and there were schools of them just upstream of the old Toxon dam site. And we actually, our kayak flotilla actually had to navigate the mist so we didn't hit them. And then the bald eagles were swooping down. You could see them coming in and eating the shad, and then they'd leave the carcasses on the rocks. I asked somebody what they're doing. They're leaving the fish there for the other wildlife, the bears, the occasional cougar that's out there, and the deer. And so this is a rare synergy. If the Delaware River, we have cougars down in Delaware. I've seen one. But if the river didn't get cleaned up down there, Philadelphia and Wilmington, then the shad would not be coming up at exactly the same time that the wildlife up here, like the bald eagles, who just came off the endangered species list, need them to fatten up after a long winter. So that's our version of the old salmon and bear, you see on wildlife shows. Feeding, gorging, they only eat the best parts like the cheeks and the belly and then leave the rest. It's that good for them. And the bald eagles do the same thing. And once word gets out about this, and it is because of events like this, people want to come here from the cities to look at this amazing spectacle. And it all happens because everything's done on a watershed approach. Right, so the Delaware River Basin, it's 8.2 million people. If it were managed as one state, it would be like about the 13th largest state in the United States. Drinking water for 5% of the United States at 16 million people. Also provides drinking water for the 1st and 7th largest metropolitan economies in the United States. I don't know of any other river basin in America that does that. I call it America's most historic watershed, America's founding watershed. We have the Liberty Belt. And the Chesapeake, the Susquehanna, the Colorado River, it does not have that type of performance. So water, 97, 3, and 1, just the basics. 97% of the water on Earth is salt, 3% fresh water, but only 1% of that fresh water is available to us. That's the Delaware River. And it's a renewable resource unless it's depleted by quality or quantity. It's the most precious chemical in society, H2O. And in terms of economics, there is no economic substitute. I mean, we can substitute coal, natural gas for coal, those other resources, but we can't substitute water. And that's why economists are really interested in it. The universal solvent, that's one of the few compounds in nature that exist in all 3 states at normal atmospheric pressure, a solid, liquid, gas. I like the solid part because I play ice hockey. So Common Waters, which I think is a great name for an organization. I think it's just a great name that sticks. So the 3 states, the C's, Common Water, in common. In watershed management, we talk about cooperation, collaboration, comity, which is the way that the comity, which is the way the DRBC works, which is a shared, the states give up some of their sovereignty and share that power with the adjacent states in a spirit of goodwill. And that's a shared governance structure. And then even competition. So if you have microbrewers out there competing to make a better brew, that's a good thing. Right? So if we look at the next slide. There's surveys done, Gallup, all over, and at the top 4 issues that people care about has to do with water, clean water, 80%. The population of the DRBC is growing. It gained 500,000 people since the census was last done in 2000. If you think about it, that's another Easton, a Trenton, a Wilmington, a Cherry Hill, a Calhoun, another big city. Why? Because it's a great place to live. It's a beautiful pastoral area, close to the major job centers in the United States. So how do you manage the basin with growing population? And many of the largest growing counties were up here, Pike, for instance, the ones in green, Pike County and Monroe, Wayne County, a major population growth, at least through 2010, although that slowed down at the beginning of the recession. Right, so America's shad, Alosa sapidissima, a savory fish, right, that's come back. They 2 feet long, they're in there right now somewhere. I'd love to get out there and catch one. And it's really, John McPhee wrote about the fish. He's a Pulitzer Prize winner at Princeton, wrote about it very, very nicely. And we like to cook them and put them on a plank, and the old trout fishermen say, you cook the shad on the cedar plank and then eat the plank. I eat the fish. It's a very delicious fish besides the bones. So a couple years ago, the Partnership for the Delaware Estuary asked us to put together an economic study. That's an organization in the Lower Basin to evaluate the economic assets of the Delaware Basin. So we had some grad students that knew how to do this. They worked with me. And when you add it up, like ports, largest freshwater port in the world, the Lower Basin, $2.5 billion of imports. Agriculture, $3.5 billion in this basin. Water supply, $3.8 billion. That's the water for Philadelphia, New York City. That's thermoelectric power benefits. Fish and wildlife benefits, $1.5 billion. And recreation, which is tourism, paddling, that kayak flotilla I talked about. And so the big thing for me was the fish and wildlife viewing. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service puts together a great every 5-year tabulation of economic values. And bird watching is a huge economic industry, not just for the trips, the trip costs, travel costs we call it, staying overnight, but the purchase of equipment, the Dicks of the world, the sporting goods stores, they really thrive based on these three: hunting, fishing, and wildlife, and bird watching. And those are all clean water industries. Because with the return of the bald eagle, with the cleaner water, more people come out and watch. And it's a great thing to see. Property values, we talked a little bit about it. With cleaner water, the studies show that, and you can prove it, that the property value increases. Right? Water quality benefits, forests. Forests are probably the largest economic asset in the Delaware Basin. There are carbon sequestration benefits, shading that lowers building costs or power costs, heating costs. And about sequestration, I would like to retire that term from the dictionary. This is a better use of it. Carbon sequestration, right? We've heard the other one. And parks benefits. I mean, the health benefits of parks in the basin are significant. If you go and work out in the park, hike or jog, you don't have to pay a membership fee at a health club. And so it's a significant asset. Although you can. So there's commercial fish landings in the lower estuary that are benefiting from the protection of the watershed here, north of the river gap. It's all connected. If this pristine area, near pristine area, was not here, we would not have a commercial fishery in the estuary, which is the nursery. Things like blue crab, $7 million, oysters, which are a dwindling fishery. But next. Skiing, you know about the skiing industry. It's a significant economic asset for the area, $325 million that we've calculated. And that's the solid form of water. Paddling, the Outdoor Industry Association, which is a very powerful lobbying group that lobbies for outdoor recreation, has calculated nationwide, and we scale it down. It's about, again, our 300 million or so, 4,000 jobs related in the entire basin. Yeah. The Upper Delaware, I saw the statistics out there. The Upper Delaware Water Gap, National Recreation Area, significant economic driver for the region, with all the business. Yeah. Next slide. Canoe kayaking. Those are just the liveries, the rentals, but did not include the travel costs, the overnight costs. So this is on the low side. Power boating, mainly in the lower part of the basin. That is a huge, and these are the hunting, fishing, and wildlife benefits that are broken out, right? $500 million apiece, approximately. And when we looked at some studies done in the 60s, there was hardly any of those type of assets along the Delaware River. And then shad fishing. These are some old studies quoted by the Pennsylvania Fish and Boat Commission. 6.5 million is probably higher now. And wild trout fishing, which you know about, there were guides and whole economies around the hamlets and the Catskills that are based around this near pristine water supply that we have up here. The National Recreation Area, that shows the travel cost, yeah. And then public water supply, which is significant. And when you take what the water is sold for and multiply it by the water use, it adds up to be about $3 billion. So next slide. And then my favorite, that's a microbrewery, iron mill down there in my area. And I asked the brewer, he lives in Newark, why he put that there. He said because of the quality of the water. Now, I was told by a brewmaster, Victory, that they did some chemistry tests of the streams in Pennsylvania. As you go up past Westchester into central Pennsylvania, and the chemistry of the water of the Pennsylvania streams is nearly identical to the chemistry of the water in Bavaria, which is the center of Munich, Black Forest area, which is the center of beer making industry. So if I were a brewer, and I'd like to be one someday, I would put a brewery in the Delaware Basin along those streams because the chemistry is very good, just like Germany. So if we look at those benefits, the forests have the highest economic benefit. Now these aren't meant for comparison, but it's a gold mine. That's the water tower of our area here. And so we look at a second way, we look at ecosystem services, where we look at the value that these ecosystems provide, like water filtration values. I mean, if you took the forest out, you'd have to build very, very expensive water treatment plants to replace what they do in terms of cleansing the water. So Philadelphia benefits from the protection of the forests up here. Trenton, Easton, all those water purveyors, if they had to build water treatment plants to replace these forests, it would be very, very expensive. And it's much less expensive to preserve or even reforest an acre of forest than it is to build an equivalent water treatment plant. It's 2 orders of magnitude less to plant a tree than it is to build a water treatment plant. And that's what I would do. And that's what New York City does. New York City started doing that in 1997 to protect the reservoir watersheds instead of building a $10 billion microfiltration plant in Yonkers, or I should say in the Bronx, right? And that was a 6.5 to 1 benefit cost ratio. They invested upstream. Next slide. So we can rank them: forests, wetlands, and farmland have significant ecosystem services value. Farmers are, I call them the original conservationists. They were conserving watersheds long before we thought about watershed management and the environmental movement. So if we look at the third way, is the jobs. It's over 500,000 jobs in the Delaware Basin are related to the Delaware River. If it wasn't here, we wouldn't have these jobs. And that's things like marine jobs in the lower part. There's a big export thing going on now down near Chester about exporting energy from the Delaware River instead of importing it, the oil, I should say. Tourism, farming, all these add up to. So when we go out and try to attract jobs to a state, we tend to look at a single industry or two, right? With incentives. Well, look at the Delaware River. It's a significant. These are real jobs when you add them up. So if you look at it 3 different ways, the Delaware Basin, no question, is worth at least $20 to $25 billion or more. And that's the average value. That's what it's worth right now. Let's look at what it would be worth if we invested more in it. And this is going to be a little tour. You might get a little dizzy because we're going to talk about economics. So the U.S. budget is about $4 trillion. The EPA's budget is only about $10 billion. The U.S. population is about it's over 320 now. And the U.S. budget per capita is about $12,000. And the EPA's budget is only $32 per person. Right? So the budget that we have at the federal level to protect water resources is minuscule. It's $30 a person. Right? That's a few dollars per month. And compare that to the resource, the value. It's underinvested, in my view, underinvested. So in economics, we can look at the demand curve. That's the downward sloping curve of supply. And the intersection of those 2 curves is what we pay now for the water resources. And if you ask people would they be willing to pay almost always they say I'd be willing to pay a little bit more to improve the water quality. And you can calculate that in something called the consumer surplus. And that's as far as we'll go with economics. I'm just saying that we can prove it through the principles of economics, that it's worth investing in the Delaware Basin. It's that triangle. Next slide. So what the water quality would be if we invested more is the intersection of marginal benefits, the downslope curve and the upsloping curve. And if you look at the intersection, that is the optimal or most efficient water quality you can have in a system, like the Delaware River.
Are you taking questions now or later?
I can in just about 2 or 3 minutes. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Right. So the Delaware, we have this beautiful forested system north of Trenton, in Pine Barrens and areas of Chester County, Pennsylvania. Yes. So we can calculate the nitrogen loads using that as a load, and about that in terms of a pollutant, and about half of that comes from wastewater, or about 30% comes from ag, and the remainder comes from the air, as well as urban suburban runoff. Right? And the thing that I just wanted to leave here today is that the thing that makes investment in by downstream interest and upstream interest is that there are differences in the cost of reducing pollutants, significant costs. So those green bars at the right-hand side of the curve, those are things like conservation tillage, grass buffers, reforestation, reforested wetlands. Those are the things that Common Waters does, that farmers do. Those are very low cost in terms of per pound reduction in nitrogen. It's $5 per pound or less. Compare that to stormwater retrofitting, urban wastewater discharge. Those are an order of magnitude, sometimes 10, 20 times more than it is to plant a forest. So instead of building an expensive water treatment plant, why not invest upstream? And that's what makes, I think, the Delaware River system so amenable to some of the things that we'll be talking about later this morning. Investing upstream. Next slide, please. And if you broke it out, you look at the costs by source, in terms of how much you'd be investing, right, about $450 million. Yes, next slide. And it's much less expensive to invest in ag than wastewater treatment, and then it's more expensive to try to reduce atmospheric reduction. That's a marginal abatement cost curve, nothing more than the low-hanging fruit. So if we look at the economic value and use and non-use, if we continue, and we can look at what would happen if we improve the water from fishable to swimmable to boatable. That's a water quality ladder. So 0 would be like the river on fire, the Cuyahoga River. We're up here. Down in the Delaware near Philadelphia, we're right about here. So how much would the benefits be if you improved in this water quality ladder? So I calculated that. The benefits would be about $190 to $350 million a year if you invested to improve the water quality. That's just the use benefits. That's the benefits that we've been talking about, wildlife viewing, things like that. Yeah. And then non-use benefits are, if you ask people, would they be willing to pay, that triangle, that adds another 380 to 800, whatever that is, upper bound, right? Next slide. So if you added them up, 500 to about $1 billion of benefits based on investments, and then relate that to the cost, the benefits, lower and upper bound, exceed about 1 to 2. So it's worth it to invest in the Delaware Basin. And you can prove that this is the intersection of that curve, where those benefits, those dashed lines intersect. The solid line is the intersection of marginal cost and benefits, and that's where you can determine where optimal water quality would be. So how do you do that? Prioritizing existing watershed programs like the USDA Farm Bill that we have in 4 states. The Soil Conservation Service does that. Prioritizing into the Delaware Basin, something I'm interested in, water quality trading. So a downstream water supplier, instead of building expensive water treatment like New York City did, they invest upstream in reforestation. A user fee approach would be a modest surcharge that would be invested upstream. I mean, that would be the law of large numbers that the journalists in the New York Times talk about. We have 8.2 million people live in the basin, 16 million benefit. If each person contributed $1 a month, $2 a month, it would add to a significant investment that you can invest in the basin. So I'm not for adding any new things to our budgets, because I pay too much in cable already. I think we all do. And cell phones, cell phones, you all do. I do too. But I think this one investment is worth it. $1 or $2 a month, that would raise millions to invest up here and in this economy. We prove it works. It will work. It's worth it. Why don't we do that? Okay. So water quality training's worked in some basins like the Long Island Sound. It's a better way to go. You can save money doing that by investing upstream. And they do this in Australia, for instance, Germany. They've been doing that. So instead of relying on appropriations by Congress or the states, relying on this user fee approach, where the money will literally flow in to the Delaware River Basin. And the last word would be about the shale issue. We know that's here, right? You can look at the value of the shale by multiplying what we think is there underneath the Delaware Basin, multiply it by its wellhead value. It's about $2 per 1,000 cubic feet now, and it fluctuates. But when you add it up, the drinking water value in the Delaware Basin, the upper Delaware Basin, is $2.8 billion. That's the value of the drinking water. Next slide. Right, that's the water that flows down to Philadelphia, Wilmington, Trent, 2.8. Forests, 4.8 billion annually. River recreation, almost $1 billion. Max, if Marcellus Shale were ever drilled here in this basin, it would be no higher than 400 million. So that is so what we're saying is that based on economics there are other things that relate to the river system are worth much more. If it ever happens, do it very carefully. So the buffer approach that the Base Commission was contemplating, the state of New York, well, with regard to the shale, if you look at the overlays, I would not do any drilling in a drinking water supply watershed because of that, not only that value of human life, but also that economic value. Well, why do it now, right? If it ever is done, it should be done with the absolute most tightly, most sophisticated regulations and overlay setback approach that we have in the United States. And this is the comparison of the non-renewable resource, a finite resource, a mineral resource, and the other three values that are due to a renewable resource. Right? And it's a really tough thing to do. It's tempting. Natural gas is domestic. They're converting all of the thermoelectric power plants to coal-fired power plants downstream to natural gas. I think there's only one coal left, and that loses much less water, much less emission. It's a really tough thing to do. So with that, thanks for the time. I think we can prove that the Delaware Basin is a significant economic asset. If you were to manage the basin as a firm, like the Harvard Water Project recommended 50 years ago, they did a case study up in Cambridge on the Delaware. I looked at some of the old articles. Manage it as an industry. And if a company managed this basin, they would invest in it because why? The benefit-cost ratio would be significantly higher than 1. And the payoff would be worth the investment. So thanks for your time. And do we have time for questions?
We've got about 10 minutes for questions.
And if you come down to Newark, stop in. Stop in Newark at the University of Delaware, Fighting Blue Hens. 1743, second oldest colonial land grant institution in the United States. Okay. Look me up. We want to have lunch with you.
Thank you. My name is Cora Edwards, and actually the question I was going to ask was answered in a subsequent slide, but I'm a legislator for Sullivan County, and last week I was at a tourism summit in Albany. There was the keynote address was by Governor Cuomo, and what he said is that traditionally tourism has been a $2 to $3 million investment in upstate New York. This year, they're going to invest $60 million. So the question that I had, coming out of the conference is, all of that investment to upstate New York, which Sullivan County is, opposite, I would say, an hour north of here, and west is where I came from. So how would an organization like the Delaware River Basin look at this type of investment in this area and capture all the interconnected parts of the water, the forest, all the different layers in which tourism will come? There's going to be massive promotion of upstate New York at JFK, at the Port Authority, at the Canadian borders. And that's such a large investment. How do we capture that on this end? That's my question.
Well, how do we capture it?
Looking at, I think that's one of the goals of this conference, regionally, on a watershed approach. So,
I think it's important that we keep looking at it the way that Harvard study did it.
Yes.
It's all interconnected. It's one entity. It's not that, we're in this county or this state, but we're a much larger system, much greater than ourselves.
Yeah, it's a region. It's defined by geography, the natural boundaries. The Delaware Basin is the way to, I think, the way to look at it. People at Harvard are pretty smart, and I think they had a great idea then, and that maybe it's time to resurrect that idea.
But that doesn't answer my question.
Yeah. How would you do it?
Well, we know it's coming.
Yes.
There has to be some sort of, willpower or decision to say, yes, we're going to match this investment with people power or sweat equity or something, because this may not happen next year. It didn't happen last year. This may be our only opportunity in which we can do that. So, that's sort of as a legislator, someone who's new and new on the regional council, that was the question I came away with is, what's the next step for us?
I just wanted to say that the way the day is designed is that Gary is giving an overview on the economics, and next up is going to be the Conservation Fund, who actually helps areas do this kind of thing. And so we're going to be exploring with the next speaker how other areas have actually taken those steps. And then this afternoon, what will happen is we have two different case studies where we'll really drill down and come up with some on the ground kind of things. So Cora, I think that your question will be answered as the day goes along.
Good, I had to ask it.
Good, yes, and that's what this is all about. It's about coming out of here with action. So thank you for reminding us.
What Laura said. But 66 million, that's an eye-opening.
60 million. Yeah.
60 million, that's
Yeah.
an eye-opening figure.
Well, they're considering it an investment.
Yeah, it
So
sure is.
that tells me that they're expecting a return on that investment. Thank you.
Other questions?
You mentioned that people would be willing to invest more, and you talked about $1 a person or $1 a person a month. Are there any statistics on how much more people would be willing to pay?
Yeah. The usual opportunity cost, which is, what you'd be willing to pay before you wouldn't pay anything, is about $4 a month.
Wow.
So about $50, it seems to be the break even. People can afford that, but anything higher it's too much.
And is that consistent across the entire river basin?
It's consistent across the basin and across the United States as well. It seems to be an affordability figure that I can afford $4 a month. I'm paying cable, I'm paying a water bill now, or any other monthly bills. I can afford the $4.
It's cheaper than buying a bottle of water.
Yeah, it's about the cost of buying a bottle of water once a month, right? So I buy that. And again, with Tom Friedman's law of large numbers, that's when it hit me. If you ever read the book, when you have a large river system like this, it would only cost a little bit. Anybody, just a little bit, it would add up awful quickly. I'm not preaching, socialism or anything. I'm preaching capitalism. Because it's about investing in your assets.
Gary, I think I heard this Right, you basically said that resource-based economies need to be managed as a regional entity in order to be optimized.
Yeah.
And that really is the same argument that the conservation groups are making, that to realize ecological benefits, they need to be managed regionally. And so it just seems like that's kind of an aha moment for me, that's a very strong parallel that needs to be brought up.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. I mean, it could be, state sharing, pooling their funds and then sharing upstream. I mean, that's been done before. But the good news is we already have a governance system that is based on shared comity. That's called the Delaware Basin Commission. JFK created already, so we don't have to create that here. And then we have the established watershed groups, these governance structures already in place. That's why I'm kind of optimistic that we already have the policy governance structures in place. We don't have the economics right yet.
How do we, I guess the issue, even though there may not be fracking right now in this particular region, there are tons of pipelines that are being built carrying fracked gas crossing the Delaware and crossing, I mean, there's at least 12 plans for the next, I think, 2 years all over this basin. I mean, those have got to be harmful. There have been, miles and miles of forest devastation. So how do you counter that when there are things being done at a federal level, and here we are trying to protect the resources that we have?
Yeah. I mean, the reality is that we have a lot of loopholes in the federal regulations regarding Marcellus Shale. You can look at all the water regulations, Clean Water Act, Safe Drinking Water, Clean Air Act, they all have loopholes when it comes to this, right? And the same thing with the pipelines. What I would do is I'd fold all the authority under the Interstate Commerce Commission, the ICC, and have them be the central federal regulator of the pipelines. That's not there yet, but that's what I would do.
How do we make it happen?
Right, your congressman? There are 25 congressmen and 8 U.S. senators. Right. Centralize the authority for this instead of having it fragmented. See? But I'm outside of Delaware, so I can. I'm recommending what I think is right.
And I'll add on to his comment. We hope that Common Waters Partnership is another venue for trying to address things on a larger scale. So it's not just about going on a county by county level, but trying to step back and look at the bigger picture and the overall impacts and working together to help mitigate those impacts. Eric?
To what level can you disaggregate the data? You've done it
Yeah.
nationwide.
Right. We can scale it down to the sub-watershed level. I mean, to like the Bushkill Creek, to the lack of waxing. We haven't done that yet, but we can do that with the models that we have. And I have just the person back in the office that can do it. Have a new graduate student working on it. We could do that if that's desired.
Yeah, I just want to follow up a little bit on the pipeline question. What do you think about having the Delaware River Basin Commission actually take authority over permitting or pipelines?
Yeah. I think if the 5 commissioners desired to do that, the DRBC would do that. And the 5 commissioners are the presidential appointee and the governors of the 4 states, including my governor.
Okay. Yeah, they haven't gotten there yet.
Sue?
I have to go back to my numbers again. So 16 million people take water out of the Delaware River. They're willing to pay $4 a month.
Yeah, I was saying closer to $1 or $2 a month, perhaps.
Okay, but
If
so,
they did do
so
four,
let's say $2 a month.
Okay.
16 million people, so
Yeah.
that would be close to $400 million a year.
Is that right? I don't have my calculator, but I knew, I said it would be busy.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah.
$400 a year if we've got 16 million people to do 2 million. So, but if you did $1, I mean, then you'd be looking at $200 million.
Yeah, you would boost the dissolved oxygen levels in the Delaware estuary from 3.5 during the summer to 4.5 to above 5, about around 5.
So that was my next question. So if you invested that much money, let's say we invested, let's take a quarter. So let's take $1 a year, so we put that down to $200 million. So if we invested $200 million a year into the Delaware we reduce the dissolved oxygens, and then would we be getting closer to the upper limits in those additional numbers you talked about, or is that?
You could. I mean, there's some uncertainties there, that's why we do the bounding, confidence intervals, but yeah. If I had $200 million to invest in the Delaware Basin, we could clean up the Delaware River. That to me is the critical path. We have the science, we have the know-how, we have the governance structure, we don't have this annual investment that you need.
So $200 million.
Right now, it's fits and starts.
$200 million investment, and your return was anywhere from $500 million to $1 billion
Yeah.
over the life.
Yeah, no doubt.
That's a huge return on investment.
It is. Right, and we didn't know this when we started. We didn't know this when we started that it'd be worth it, but it is.
Wow.
And the Harvard people were saying this 50 years ago. That's why they picked, out of all the watersheds in the United States to study up there, they picked the Delaware River Basin. I mean, it was hot. JFK just, he's a Massachusetts guy that really kind of died off for a while, and now maybe it's time to bring it back. At a conference like this.
I would like to introduce Kendra Brickley.
Got it.
From the Conservation Fund, based in Arlington. And I think we've got a real interesting talk all set to go here, so we'll let her get started.
Great.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Thank you so much for having me here today. I'm really pleased to be here. If you can't hear me at all, please let me know. I'll try to adjust the mic. I don't want to blast you, so I do tend to have a pretty good speaking voice. But good morning. I'm Kendra Brickley. I'm with the Conservation Fund. I am based out of Arlington, Virginia, and I just want to thank you and the sponsors, Pinchot, Regional Plan Association, and the Common Waters Partnership for inviting me to participate in your program here today. I do a lot of these kinds of programs around the country, and frequently I'm facilitating them. So I was, going, okay, the edge of my seat, trying to keep moving things along. So I will try to keep my presentation on target. Please, if you have questions, feel free to ask them throughout. We'll try to touch the time. So we are talking today about gateway communities, and I really like the framework that was presented by Regional Plan Association this morning about shared values. Because really, when we're talking about gateway communities, we're moving away from an either-or consideration and really looking about the connection and the balance between communities and conservation. So, and all that encompasses, the economics, the assets of an area, and all the people who are involved in that. So, go ahead. I wanted to provide a little bit of a background to the Conservation Fund, introduce who we are and why we were invited to participate, and then get into some of the elements of gateway communities that we see and factor into the work that we do, and then really try to get into some case studies, because I think those help illustrate the process and help answer the question of capturing the value from this kind of work. So with the Conservation Fund, we are, I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, we are a national nonprofit environmental organization. We work in all 50 states of the United States, across the country, and we have a unique dual mission that fits very well with gateway communities because, number one, we do direct on-the-ground land conservation. We've protected over 7 million acres of land across the United States since 1985. But we've always coupled that with community and economic development, recognizing that we have to have that balance between conservation and the communities that's so essential to the success of valuing our conservation investments to ensure that communities have good jobs and housing and opportunities. We do that through a variety of ways. We have an aquaculture research facility. We offer low interest loans to natural resource businesses through our Natural Capital Investment Fund. We also do our sustainable programs. So that's one of the areas that I work on, which is our Conservation Leadership Network, trying to build the capacity for of communities, of all of our conservation partners, so communities, we engage with corporations, with other conservation groups, just the range of stakeholders, because we really want to affect and impact on the ground change. We want to see those results on the ground. And to do so, we really feel like you need to engage other groups, not just the choir, but really reach out and build that capacity. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. The Conservation Leadership Network is housed at the National Conservation Training Center. That's in Shepherdstown, West Virginia. If you have a chance to go there, it's a fantastic facility and a great training arm. It is the home of Fish and Wildlife Service conservation programs, training programs. If you can click through this. Just very briefly, these are some of the things that the Conservation Leadership Network is engaged in. Most specifically and relevant to this work is our work on balancing nature and commerce in gateway communities. There was a book that we put out in partnership with Sonoran Institute a number of years ago that sort of set the tone for this. We've developed national courses, and we do place-based workshops across the country when we're invited in. So we did do a course with the Poconos Forest and Waters Conservation Landscape Initiative a couple years ago. And Janet Sweeney is here that represents that program. And in addition to the courses and workshops that we do, we also have done livability and sustainable tourism assessments across the country. So, gateway communities. Some of you may be familiar with that term. If you're not, really what we're talking about is the portals to our nation's public lands. That's the traditional model of gateway communities. I would say that in many areas, Poconos is a great area, a great example of this, that it also encompasses frequently private resource lands. And the model was traditionally, an individual community that was the single gateway into, say, the Yellowstone National Park, something like that. In many places, though, it's over gateway communities across a wide landscape, along a river corridor, along a heritage corridor, or scattered with a range of different lands. But these gateway communities are the source of services. It's where you're going to go to sleep overnight, to get a meal, to rent a kayak, whatever. But increasingly, they're also magnets for businesses, families, and for retirees, and even for young people. One of the central components of gateway communities is this element of partnerships. And we've really focused on, in gateway communities, that partnership between the public land manager and the community. These are some of the issues and why you would need that partnership specifically with public land managers. I'll just give an illustration, and this is actually thinking of public lands with the U.S. Army. Fort Stewart, Georgia was an area that we worked with. They do heavy artillery training at Fort Stewart. And one of the importance of working between the community and the public lands came out because when the county sat down with the Army, they discovered that the county had been marketing the community to attract retirees. And they were proposing that developments go around the fort boundary. Okay. The Army does heavy artillery training up to the fence line. So it might be an incompatible land use there. So really need to open up that conversation that underscores the importance of that.
Yeah, thanks.
Go ahead. So we heard this morning about the impacts from the parks and refuges. Here are just a few. The visitor impact, this is significant contributions. I'm really pleased to see the research that's being done throughout the river corridor. I saw the information from the Park Service out front, and Jessica shared with me the study that she's going to talk about later on the return of the environment. So go ahead. And the Outdoor Industry Association, specifically focusing in on outdoor recreation. This is new data on the economic benefits of outdoor recreation. 6.1 million American jobs, reflecting $646 billion in recreation spending. And the impact back to the communities is significant, both in terms of the tax revenues, the direct economic benefits, but also recognizing that these are essential, the natural and cultural resources that attract the outdoor recreation, that attract people to come and experience these fantastic areas, also contribute to the quality of life. And in any of these efforts that you're thinking of, it should come up with solutions that are right for the visitors, but more importantly, that are right for the communities. Because really that's what really helps develop and build off of the sense of place and that uniqueness of a place. You need to make sure that you're planning well for the residents and what they want and need. Okay, when we engage with gateway communities, we focus in on 4 specific areas. Number 1, community character, the economic benefits. We've heard a lot about that. I'll share a little bit more on that. Natural and cultural resources, making sure that we're protecting what matters up front, but then also maintaining that over time, managing it, and even enhancing those resources over time. Okay, the element of partnership, and then putting that all together, what do you want? You want to come up with an action plan. So understanding your background, what you have already, and then moving forward. The first element is on community character, because studies show that fundamentally the community appearance is linked to the economic well-being. People make decisions every day on where they're going to shop, where they're going to live, where they're going to go on vacation, and it's frequently based on what a community looks like, that you're attracted to a place based on that unique sense of place and community character. Also on the economics, that the benefits of tourism and recreation build on themselves, and recognizing the importance of this is to ensure that you are preserving the natural resources for the future and sustaining them to sustain the jobs, incomes, and investments in the communities. And again, doing this not just for tourism, but also for the community. So building those choices, attracting businesses and visitors, and building that overall economic diversity. So, and this reflects this concept a little bit more. So Steve Morse from University of Tennessee had talked about this a little bit, done some research in this area a little bit more, but all too often, there's a lot of money coming into communities, and you need to understand what it is that's coming in, but also what is going out. And so as you're filling up your economic bucket, you want to see about having more of that stay within the community and circulating around and not leaving. So that you have some of the inputs, the salaries, the visitors, the investments, both public and private, that are coming into your community. And then making sure that it's staying in the community, that it's not just circulating back out to out-of-town businesses or external contractors, making sure that you're really capitalizing on that, because all those leaks represent local business opportunities. A little bit more about the economic impacts. Richard Florida wrote a book called The Creative Class. Creative class is a whole host, it's not just artists, but includes artists, but also graphic production, designers, IT personnel, engineers, scientists. The creative class is attracted to areas with high quality natural and cultural resources. And this is creative classes. Every economic development official is trying to see how can we attract more of the creative class to our communities. And having the high quality natural cultural resources is one of the hopes to do that. What we're finding when we go around and talk to communities that they're starting to realize this and to capitalize on this. We had one example in Giles County, Virginia, where a nanotechnology company relocated to Giles County, brought 70 jobs, and built a new factory, a new production facility in Giles County, because the owner was an avid fly fisherman. And he said, I was taken aback by the mind-blowing mountain views. Okay, that's why nanotechnology came to Giles County. Traverse County, Michigan, I have this brochure up here because they recognize that most leads for new business and relocation of talent that came to their community was because people came to visit, loved the beauty of the area, and wanted to live there. Okay, so recognize this. You know, the tourism is part of your economic development, direct benefit, but also how can you attract others to the community and capitalize off of that. And then we also heard some of the data this morning about how it helps sells homes and communities and increase property values and faster sales absorption by the proximity to natural resources. And that element of collaboration is so critical to be engaging with your public land managers, with your economic development, with your religious groups, your corporations, all kinds of folks, bringing them together, bringing them to the table on this so that you have common waters and common ground. So the questions that we ask and work with communities on are how can you increase the opportunities based on these natural resources? How can you capitalize on those natural resources to increase your economic base? But also making sure that you're maintaining and sustaining those resources that, again, are going to attract people to come to your community to visit, but also really enhancing that quality of life for the people who live there. So I want to spend the rest of the time talking about some case studies and examples of how this is done across the country. This is really the relationship between communities and conservation, and I started with this slide on purpose. This is Silverton, Oregon. We actually did a green infrastructure workshop for the Pacific Northwest in Silverton, and I love this. Here's the covered bridge out in the county, and in the downtown Silverton, there's a mural of this bridge. They worked hard to protect that bridge, and they're telling the story on their streets. This isn't the only mural. There's probably 40 or more murals scattered through the city of Silverton, and people come and spend the day in Silverton. They go visit Silver Falls State Park, which is fantastic, and then they come and spend the day walking around Silverton. And it tells the story of the community. There's all these murals that talk about local boy that became an astronaut, about the timber industry, and then also just, arts about the families and stories of the people who live there. So it's a great connection, physical connection, and has great benefits for the place. We worked with Shepherdstown, West Virginia. It's where we're housed at. Easy to send a team to the course that way. But there was a team, when we offer these balancing nature and commerce courses, they're typically team-based, building on a team of diverse stakeholders, of different partners. And one of the key people on that team was Dr. Mark Cucuzella. He is a physician at the West Virginia Department of Medicine, West Virginia University, and he and his team members were really concerned because West Virginia is #2 in obesity rate across the United States. And so they came to our national course and said, we want to work on public health and on the obesity challenge. And so they came up with this idea of running in the community They have a marathon and several other races. This Freedoms Run that goes through 4 public lands around Shepherdstown, including Harper's Ferry, Vecino Canal, Antietam Battlefield, and Shepherdstown South. We also worked on a binational program in October 2011. The Heart of the Continent Partnership brought 10 teams together for a binational workshop. They focused on, how can they capitalize on all the great natural resources across the parks and forests of this vast region, from Ontario to into Minnesota. And got the attention of the National Geographic Society. One of their outcomes was to create, working with National Geographic to create a geotourism map. They're now one of 18 geotourism destinations across the country. We also worked with the New River Gorge, a 4-county region surrounding the New River Gorge National Recreation Area. This area was faced with kind of a good challenge to have, but a challenge nonetheless. The Boy Scouts Jamboree was relocating from a site in Virginia where it had been many years. Bechtel Foundation was helping the Boy Scouts build a whole new facility to house the Boy Scout Jamboree. This is when all the Boy Scouts come together, actually internationally, and would attract 50,000 Boy Scouts at one time, and other visitors. They were anticipating 300 additional visitors for the Jamboree. That's a lot of people coming into a very small rural area. And so they wanted to prepare physically in terms of their infrastructure, in terms of their commercial, protecting the natural resources that they valued so much, and realizing the economic benefit of that, but also wanted to make sure that they were doing right by the community. And so they really focused in on education, health, and workforce development as 3 priority areas that they really felt like they had to capture. And they'll host the first Jamboree at the site this summer. A little bit deeper into a couple examples. You may be familiar with the Pennsylvania Wilds. This is another conservation landscape initiative of the state Pennsylvania Department of Conservation and Natural Resources, akin to the Poconos work that Dennis DeMar and Stephen were involved with. This is a 12-county region in north central Pennsylvania, 2.1 million acres of public land. That's the size of Yellowstone. And it encompasses the Allegheny National Forest and State Park Forest and game commission lands, game lands. The Pennsylvania Wilds, these 12 counties had not really worked together before. In fact, they were typically in competition with one another. So looking at a broad area similar to your river basin, thinking about how do you get people to work together? Well, the state was making some investments in the area, but also needed to make it believable and make it work at the county and community level. So they said they wanted to focus in on regional branding. They came to our national course. We worked with them as a place-based course in 2008. And some of the outcomes, they said, we want to develop a design guide to indicate what development has looked like in this area for years, and what are some of the common themes, and just use it as a forum, as a platform to talk to people, existing businesses expanding, new businesses coming in, what reflects the design of the Pennsylvania Wilds. And I'll show you a success from that in just a moment. They also created an artisan trail. So ensuring that there was an artisan outlet for the products made within the Pennsylvania Wilds, that there was an outlet in every single county. And the new data just came in, and it's gone from 12 outlets to 15 to 30. It's doubled in the last year in terms of the number of artisan outlets. And all of a sudden, the artists in the Pennsylvania Wilds that were just marketing to local people suddenly have a much broader market. And using the Pennsylvania Wilds brand across those 12 counties has meant a greater recognition of the Pennsylvania Wilds products. So very, very cool. And then, just to flip back just for a moment, currently having phenomenal success in new business development, new wineries, breweries, restaurants in the area, a outfitter, people coming back to the area to start businesses. And I love this example, Homewood Snowboards. They're now manufacturing snowboards in the Pennsylvania Wilds. They're branded products made in the area, so it connects back to the manufacturing as well. And I mentioned the Artisan Trail. Go ahead. Okay, here's the before after, the impact of the design guide. This is Waterville Tavern along the Pine Creek Gorge. So just by asking the businesses to reflect these kinds of concepts. This gets at the leaky bucket. Okay, infrastructure investments coming into the community. This, in this case, is the state making investments in terms of public facilities, restrooms, park facilities, signs, boat ramps, things that really supported the needs of the community, were identified by them, but also were good for visitors, and making sure that they were really making the most of those investments, those dollars coming in. Briefly, just some of the impact that has been taking place from the success of this regional identity and external marketing, and helping build the brand. And go ahead and click on. And they just came out with the latest results, $1.7 billion of economic impact in Pennsylvania Wilds, just documented. Go ahead. So success, they're working together regionally. They've really recognized the value of working together, economic impact, and in fact, support for additional conservation. I'm going to turn our attention now to Tennessee, to Unicoi County. Anybody been to Unicoi County? All right, probably the Appalachian Trail. Okay, this is called the Valley Beautiful because when you stand on that valley floor and you look around 360 degrees of mountain view. 50% of the land base is owned by the Cherokee National Forest. The Appalachian Trail goes through this, and you have fantastic whitewater rafting in the Nolechucky River. The community was facing an economic struggle, though, and wanted to make sure that they had good economic opportunity in the future. They wanted to make sure that they had jobs for their youth, and they were concerned about that. But they were faced with some difficult choices. One was a nuclear waste facility proposed for their county, and a lot of controversy, a lot of people for it, many people opposed. It was eventually voted down, but it was one of these fissures in the community. Another one was a conservation project called Rocky Fork, 10,000 acre parcel that had been privately forested for a number of years. It was surrounded by the National Forest, and the owner in 2007 proposed creating a gated community and developing this. This would be the first, as I mentioned, that it was 360-degree mountain views. It would be one of the first developments of that kind, and it was a pristine property, just beautiful. And again, this was very controversial. So the community said, we need to think about our economic future, and we need to talk about these issues. And a group came to our national forest. There were some people on that team that were very opposed to this idea of, that there's a balance between nature and commerce. And the idea of protecting Rocky Fork, of thinking about tourism as an opportunity for them. That county commissioner said, okay, I'll go ahead with this and we'll kind of explore this. So it came up to the courts. They came out just with an action plan saying, we need to build support and understanding among the residents for the stewardship of our natural resources. And let's try to increase the sustainable tourism as part of the economic mix. This team came together and said, you know what, we're gonna start small. And the first project that we're gonna work on is the cleanup of a scenic overlook. Go ahead. Called Beauty Spot. Now this is a place where people go on stargazing or picnicking with their family. It had degraded incredibly. And the access road up there, the parking lot, the facilities were really decaying. And the community was really frustrated about it. It was Forest Service owned. This is the project that they decided to start with. Okay? And they did. The Forest Service stepped up, the county stepped up, and they worked together on cleaning up the access and the overlook. This is the view that they wanted to preserve, and for the community and for visitors to enjoy. Go ahead. Based on that, they built off of that, and it really moved the meter from distrust to trust between the Forest Service, between the public land managers and the county. And as a result, a whole host of other things started happening. Forest Service started devoting resources to the county because they realized they had a vision, they had an idea of where they wanted to go, and there was buy-in growing on that. So when they replaced their signs, they made sure that they routed through the town, so the town got the economic benefit of visitors coming through. Okay, new trails. County decided to support the Rocky Fork acquisition, and the county became one of 4 Appalachian Trail towns nationally. Go ahead. They also started to realize the economic benefit that was already occurring in their county, but that nobody had documented before, and realized that that economic benefit then they had the potential for even more impact if they really started to cultivate it and work together on this through more strategically. So impact continued. They got designated as one of the top mountain biking communities in the Blue Ridge. They even got international recognition when their 4-H club decided to map the Appalachian Trail going through the community, GPS mapping. They were recognized by the Rio +20 Summit as one of the fine youth examples and leadership. And in October 2012, Rocky Fork was protected and designated as the newest state park in Tennessee. The county commissioner that had formerly been opposed to this came up to our partner, my colleague at the Conservation Fund, with tears in his eyes and hugged him, because this was such a tremendous impact, positive impact for the community economically, as well as connecting to conservation. So it really resulted in a changed point of view in Unicoi, that economic success couples with a better quality of life for the community through the protection of natural resources, and really changed the opposition to conservation to support. A few other examples, I'm just up here, everything from waterfront revitalization plan. I included the update on what's going on with Pocono Forest and Waters here, and Janet's a great resource for you to talk to more about that. Other places, they focus in on signs or web apps, artisan trails, all kinds of trail programs. Just to close out, a list of strategies for success. How do you capture this value? How do you do this? You start with a vision. And you do that by bringing together diverse partners and having people who say, hey, let's not focus on what we disagree on. Let's focus in on what we can agree on, okay, and what makes this place special. Come up with a vision for what you don't want to do. Designate, understand what you have already. All too often we come in and we say, let's talk about what your assets are. And there's a battlefield that nobody knew about, or there's just a business that nobody knew about, and they make those connections and leverage off those assets. Find that fit between community and tourism. Don't just do this because you want more tourism, you want more heads and beds. That's not the reason. The reason is you like this place, you love this place, and want to make it better and build off that. Create the champions, identify the champions, cultivate the champions in leadership, and celebrate the success over time. And really, I would urge you to start with these kinds of questions. You know, if those lands, if the river basin wasn't there, what would your region's economy be like? We had a great articulation of that this morning. What would life be like? And so therefore, what is your vision for the future? There it is. So with that, I'll close and take any questions that you have. Thank you.
Any questions?
Where to start?
Where to start? Well, this is a good place. You know, it's really, how can you know, who else needs to be at the table? I think that's an important question. Who's missing? And starting also with your passion. You know, why are you doing this? That leads into then, you know, bringing other people in. Do they, what's their vision? You know, what's their passion? And you may be able to start from that point and build off of that, because that's an area of agreement. Okay? And then build from there. I also urge that when you get to the project phase, when you're starting to think about projects and your actions, you know, think big, but also feel free to start small, because you want to build off success. So if you look at Unifoy cleaning up a mountain, a scenic overlook, doesn't seem like a big project, but that was the thing. That was the little kernel that changed the community. Example from Ridgeway, Pennsylvania, which is, you know, a community in the Pennsylvania wilds. They started with a cleanup of a park. And this was even before, you know, we were involved with them, but they said, you know, there's a park in the downtown that just, we need to clean it up. And they got out, a bunch of local chainsaw carvers came out, and they had to take some trees down, but they carved animals into the stumps. And they thought that was so cool that they started the Chainsaw Carving Rendezvous. And if you haven't heard of that, it said in February in Ridgeway, Pennsylvania, they get, you know, 15,000 people, I think, now coming in February to Ridgeway, and from around the world to the Chainsaw Carving Rendezvous that started with a small little project.
In a lot of things, you have groups within a community that may be in conflict with each other, their interests, and they are resolving it, but they are all locally based. Do you have examples of where perhaps the conflict was from an outside, a non-local group putting a threat on a resource, and how that would be resolved? What do you mean?
Well, I mean, you could say that the Boy Scouts was, you know, potentially a threat to the area, because it was, you know, they were making a change, a pretty dramatic impact. You know, 350,000 more visitors. That's a little bit different than, like, say, a utility or something coming in. But it's still, you know, bringing people together and convening and saying, you know, what matters here. You know, when it's and where are the items of greatest importance? You know, where, you know, this is the, you know, and making sure that you're protecting those up front and going through that process. Trying to think of some other examples, but, you know, that's one. And certainly I would say, you know, the Pennsylvania wilds, you know, they're facing the Marcellus Shale development right now. And one of the things that, you know, that it is happening there already. And so one of the things they've done is they said, you know, we're going to start engaging with the companies and talking to them and telling them, you know, what matters and what we need to do. And so they just got a grant to update the design guide for working with communities, you know, how the shale companies can work better with communities and designing for that. So.
When you say they,
In terms of the Pennsylvania wilds?
Right. Is that a coordinating committee or?
They have formed a Pennsylvania Wilds planning team. This was actually one of the first actions that they did, was to get planning staff from all 12 of the counties to sign a don't know if it's cooperative agreement, but it's an agreement to work together collaboratively and just to meet.
So the planners then become administrators as well?
Well, they go back and work with their individual counties. And out of that, there is a Marcellus Shale committee. Other questions? Mm-hmm.
Just wondering how communities get engaged with your organization. What's the process?
Come and talk to me. Send us an email. In terms of, we do, and I'm glad you actually raised that, we do have a national course that will be offered. I put the flyer out there, I think it's February 10th through 14th at the National Conservation Training Center in Shepherdstown. And you can bring, it is a team-based course, February 10th through 12th in Shepherdstown. So I would love to see a team from this area come down to the course. We also do place-based workshops when we're invited in. So we don't have a regular calendar of when those happen. It's when an area says, we'd like you to come and work with us on that. So, you know, starts with a conversation. Mm-hmm.
It's not really a question, it's just a comment, particularly for those folks in the room who have never heard of Common Waters. I mean, I've been with the group since pretty much the beginning, and I just wanted to say that it's been really amazing to me over the last 5 years that, you know, starting out 5 years ago, I was hard pressed to tell you who the planner, my counterpart, my peer on the other side of the river was, or in upstate, up in the upper Delaware and New York. And now I regularly talk with Heather in Sullivan County, or Eric Snyder in Sussex County, New Jersey, or Albert in Warren County. I think Common Waters has been that partnership in bringing all of these folks together and getting us all working together. And I just want the folks in the room who aren't familiar with what we've been doing over the last 4 or 5 years to know that's in place, and we're working as partners now.
That's fantastic. I've been very impressed with the partnership that exists here, and it sounds like you're trying to expand the number of people at the table, or the constituencies at the table through this forum. So, over here.
Have any of the gateway projects taken a look at how do you provide for renewable fuel, perhaps for people coming, electric vehicle charging stations, biodiesel fueling stations, that type of?
Yeah, there are actually a couple examples of that. One specific one is Floyd, Virginia, along the Blue Ridge Parkway, that they've actually been doing quite a lot on renewables. I think they have solar cells at their farmers markets, they have electric charging station, and I think they had some sort of community program on solar and wind as well. And then, not Delaware County, New York, Madison County, New York is also doing some of that. And interestingly, we actually just revamped our Balancing Nature and Commerce course to go beyond, to still include gateway communities, but to more broadly reflect rural communities and landscapes. And so we tweaked it a little bit, and we actually included a new module on renewable energy and at the community level.
Thanks, Lori. So I'd like to introduce Hattie Elkis with the, I never get the acronym right, Delaware Valley Regional Planning Commission. So she's a little ways south of here. She gets some of our water we send downstream from up here. And they've done a lot of really interesting work in that region around the Philadelphia area. So we're going to hear about today.
Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you very much. And I want to thank Diane for introducing me to Stephanie, and Stephanie for inviting me here today to present this presentation. And I've actually done this presentation a number of times, but usually like in a hotel ballroom that's really with no windows, and even if there were windows, you might not want to look out at the parking lot. So this is an extra inspiring background, and I'm really happy to be here today. So this study actually builds on what we heard this morning from both Jerry and Kendra, and I'm going to be talking about a lot of economic value and throwing a lot of numbers at you. You don't have to memorize them. They're all available. I'll give you the links later on if you want them. And also we'll be talking about gateway communities. So the area that I'm focusing on is the greater Philadelphia area, and that's the city of Philadelphia and the 4 surrounding counties of Bucks, Montgomery, Chester, and Delaware counties. And we did this study a couple years ago that looks at the value of the protected open spaces in our region and shows how they generate millions of dollars in economic return for our region. And this study is a little bit different than the other ones because it does focus not on the whole region and all the resources, but on the protected lands in particular. And that's because our region's been under development pressure, so we feel the need to protect our open space in terms of parks and land trust reserves, and protect and preserve farmland because it helps shape our development and make sure that we have those resources. So the study is actually a partnership between my organization, the Delaware Valley Regional Planning Commission, and we are the Metropolitan Planning Organization for the Greater Philadelphia area, covering those 5 counties I mentioned, as well as 4 counties in New Jersey. And then we partnered with a nonprofit organization called the Green Space Alliance, which is a consortium of nonprofit land trusts, government organizations, and other environmental organizations that work together to promote the protection and stewardship of open space in southeastern Pennsylvania. So before I get into the study, let me give you a little lay of the land. I mentioned it's a 5-county region, and we've protected over 200,000 acres of open space in our 5 counties. This again includes parks, federal, state, county, and local parks, preserved lands from land trusts owned in these lands, and preserved farmland. And some of the areas that you may be familiar with are Valley Forge National Park, Hopewell Furnace, maybe some of the state parks like French Creek, Nockamixon, or Ridley Creek Park, and then a lot of county and municipal parks as well. We are actually very proud of the over 200,000 acres that we have protected so far, but we're not resting on our laurels. We know that we have to be very careful and thoughtful as we look ahead. Our regional planning efforts have identified another 200,000 acres that we want to see protected to preserve our climatic soils and our natural resources and provide outdoor areas for our kids to play. However, to get to that point, it's not going to be so easy. But we've done a lot of planning work, and we've done a lot of planning work around trails in particular, which I want to just take a little sidebar and explain our trail network and why it's so important to us. So this is our trail network, just showing the regional trails, not all the local trails that feed into it. And this morning in the breakout session, we were talking a lot about the need to brand an area. And we have such a big area here, so many different trails, including the East Coast Greenway and the Schuylkill Trail and things like that. But we decided to brand all of the trails under one umbrella name that we came up with called the Circuits. Hope that resonates with you. We spent a lot of money coming up with that. But anyway, it was an idea so that people could say, I'm going to go take a ride on the circuit. And they might start on one trail and end up on another one, and it would all blend together. And it doesn't really matter where you are as long as you're outside exercising on a trail. And trails are really important in our region for a number of reasons. One is because our region is, we have rural areas, but it's obviously not as rural as up here. It's much more built out. So it's a lot easier to have linear open space than big chunks of open space. So we want to develop our trails as something that we can do in our built-up landscape. We also have a lot of abandoned railways, we have utility rights-of-way, we have canal towpaths, we have greenways. So there's a lot of opportunities to build trails. Trails provide a lot of economic development opportunities. I'm going to talk about that a little bit later, as well as trails, even though they may be called passive recreation, there's nothing passive about being on a trail. I've never seen anyone sitting or laying on a trail. You're out there exercising, and there's obviously a lot of health benefits to being on a trail. So I was talking about the difficulty of protecting another 200,000 acres in our region, and map shows our development patterns way back in 1930. Of course, we lived in very compact development patterns around Philadelphia and our river and trolley towns. But after World War II and suburbanization, we started to spread out, and then it really took off after 1970, where we ended up developing at the rate of an acre an hour. And you can see what that looks like on our blog map, where we've sprawled out. And and that's what it would look like if we continue to sprawl out in the year 2035. So we also know that our region is forecast to grow by another 500,000 people and 250,000 jobs over the next 25 years. And if those people and jobs continue to consume the same amount of land that they have in the past, we would develop another 150,000 acres of land. And just to put that in perspective, that's more than all of Delaware County, if you're familiar with our region. So we develop another whole county worth of land. So don't get me wrong, we actually want our region to continue to attract people and jobs, but we do think that where those people and jobs are located will have everything to do with our future livability, sustainability, and even economic competitiveness. We want to have those people and jobs come to our region, but live in areas that are centers or areas where the infrastructure is either in place or planned, so that in turn, we can preserve our prime ag soils and natural resources. So, how can we support future preservation efforts? Well, that's the question that we asked ourselves many times until we came up with this idea to do the study. And before, we thought that, many people thought protecting open space was a luxury. It's something that you do when economic times are good. It's something that you do that's a nicety, but you really get nothing back in return except maybe a ribbon cutting. It's something that you don't do during a recession. However, we did the study because we knew that there's actually a lot of economic value in protecting open space. And so we did the study to prove the opposite, that protecting open space actually generates a lot of value, in fact, hundreds of millions of dollars in value. And we wanted to use the study to reframe the dialogue about open space as a benefit, not just an expense, with the overall goal of raising political and financial support to preserve more open space. So the study was funded by DCNR, thank you DCNR, Lenfest, Clenil, and JP Mascaro, and it was conducted by a team of consultants that we selected through a competitive process, and that's the team of the Economy League of Greater Philadelphia, Econsol Corporation, Keystone Conservation Trust, and the U.S. Forest Service. And these are people that live and breathe numbers and data and things like hedonic regression analysis and input-output modeling and hydro models. So they do this really well. And if you have any questions about the methodology that I'm going to not go into too deeply, but if you have any questions about the numbers, I can certainly try to answer them. And if I can't, I can point you to the 300-page appendix, which outlines everything that was done. Also, the numbers that I'm going to present to you, I think you'll find are very large, but I want to also say that they're probably conservative estimates because in most cases, the consultants came up with a range of numbers, and we chose to use either the median or the low end of that range. So what the study does is it shows how our protected open spaces, those 200,000 acres, create value in 4 different ways. They increase home and property values, which you've heard before, provide ecosystem services, which you've also heard before, health and recreation benefits, and they generate economic activity. So let's start with the property values. I think everyone or anyone that's bought or sold a house knows that the value of your house goes up or down based on the square footage, the structural condition, the school district, things like that. Well, the proximity of that house to open space will also affect its value. In our region, all the houses that are within 1 mile of open space have increased the value of housing stock by $16.3 billion. That's billion with a B. And what that means is if we were to take away that 200,000 acres of open space and replace it with something neutral, the value of the housing stock would drop by $16.3 billion. Well, that's a really big number, hard to wrap your arms around. What does it mean for the average house? The average house within 1 mile of protected open space enjoys a premium of $10,000 in their sale value. The closer that house is to the open space, the higher that value is, and the farther away, the lower it is, up to about 1 mile. So again, 10,000 is a kind of a flat figure. We did a variety of case studies where we drilled down to see, well, what's the actual impact on houses within these particular protected open spaces. So I'm just going to go through a couple of them. The Perkins Trail is a 20-mile trail through Montgomery County. Houses that are within a quarter mile of the Perkins Trail are worth $5,000 more than otherwise similar houses in the region. The Big Woods is a big 73,000 acre, largely unfragmented chunk of big woods on the border of Chester and Berks County, and houses there are worth $8,000 more. Peace Valley Park is a 1,500 acre park near Doylestown in Bucks County. Those houses have an added premium of $35,000. Clark Park is a little 9-acre oasis park in West Philadelphia. The houses there have an added premium of $45,000. And here's the mother of all trails, or the mother of all property value increases. In Radnor Township, the houses that are within a quarter mile of the Radnor Trail are worth nearly $70,000 more than otherwise similar houses. And if you're familiar with Radnor, it's a very affluent community, and the original number actually here was so high we took a closer look. And we ended up comparing the houses within a quarter mile of the Radnor Trail just to other houses in Radnor Township because it has a very popular school district. And that's how we came up with this number, so it is actually an even more effective measure of the value of the trail. Ironically, when this trail was being built, many people opposed it, and now many of those same people have doors on their fences to have immediate access to the trail. So the fact that being close to open space has value has not been lost on real estate agents, who are a savvy bunch, and they've been using proximity to open space as a marketing tool. Here's two actual ads that feature the fact that these houses that are for sale back up onto the Radnor Trail or are very close to the Perkins Trail. The second factor that we looked at is environmental services or ecosystem services. And these are the things that Mother Nature does for us every day, quietly and gracefully, that we often just take for granted. But if she didn't do them, we would have to pay out of pocket to have these same services rendered. So you can look at a lot of different things when you're trying to measure ecosystem services. For example, if you're a big orchard area, you might look at the bee population to pollinate the trees. We decided, out of all the things that we could focus on, we focused on 6 items, 6 ecosystem services. We looked at water supply, waste assimilation, flood mitigation, air pollution control, wildlife habitat provision, and carbon sequestration. And within our region, the 200,000 acres provided value of about $132.5 million every year through those services. If we break that down into some of the groups, we can get smaller numbers. So the protected open space filters out non-point source pollution and replenishes the water supply at a value of $61 million a year, that we don't have to pay extra to our water purveyors, for example. Flood mitigation, all those parks along the rivers and the creeks provide flood mitigation to the value of $37 million a year, and the vegetation on the parks cleans the air to the value of $17 million a year. So the other item that we wanted to look at is stormwater management. Does anyone here come from a community that has trouble with stormwater management? Maybe everybody? So this is a really big issue in our area, perhaps because it's more developed. And we wanted to know, we intrinsically knew that open space helps with that, but we wanted to put a dollar figure to it. So for that, we hired the Forest Service, and they used their iTree Hydro model to help us out. What the model does is it takes a watershed or sub-watershed, and it converts the protected land within that watershed to the same land use intensity as the surrounding area, and then calculates how much additional runoff there would be, and then how much it would cost to manage it. So we had, I'm sorry, can you go back one second? So we could not, it's an expensive model to run. We could not run it for the entire 5-county region, so we just picked these 4 sub-watersheds, which kind of run through the rural, suburban, urban gradient. So within those 4 watersheds, if we converted those protected lands to the same intensity of the surrounding land uses in those watersheds, we would have another 200 million cubic feet of runoff. And to this day, I'm still trying to figure out what that looks like or what that is equivalent to. And if anyone can help me out with that, it would be great. But what we do know is that it would cost $87 million to manage that stormwater, just to build the physical infrastructure to manage that stormwater, and then another $2.5 million every year to maintain it. So that's a pretty big number. That's only for those 4 sub-watersheds, which are only 10% of the region. And I can't factor that up to 100% of the region because every watershed is different. But I think this exercise gives everyone a feel for the magnitude of savings that our protected open spaces are providing for stormwater management. The third category we looked at are the recreation and health benefits. And if you thought the other numbers were big, they actually get even bigger here. So the recreational benefits are also sometimes called direct use benefits, and it's what people get. It's what they would be willing to pay if they had to pay to use a park, but of course parks are free. So the average family in our region saves about $400 a year by having free access to the parks for their recreation. So that's an extra $400 in their pocket. The really big numbers are with the health benefits. And here what we looked at are the number of people that exercise strenuously on our outdoor facilities at least 3 times a week, and what are the benefits of that. And because the people that exercise strenuously outdoors are healthier, they're avoiding $800 million in healthcare costs. And because they're fitter, they're avoiding $15 million in workers' compensation claims. And because the people that exercise are generally happier, healthier, more alert, and more productive, they are avoiding $500 million in lost productivity costs. The last category is jobs and revenue. And here we calculated that those 200,000 acres of protected lands support about 7,000 jobs in the region, which in turn support about $300 million in salaries that's, again, spent back in the region. There's also $566 million in expenditures. That's money that kind of exchanges hands because of the open space. That's again adding back into the economy. And finally, there's $30 million that's fed back to local governments in income, sales, and business taxes. So there's really something for everyone in terms of economic activity. Now I'm going to drill down a little bit further to some of the case studies that we looked at. And the first one is, I mentioned before, the Perkiomen Trail. It's a 20-mile trail in Montgomery County. And it's a very popular trail in the summer. It gets about 50,000 users every month. It's generated, the recreational benefit is $18 million in savings in terms of what people would be willing to pay. I presented this to the Montgomery County Commissioners, and they said, "Oh, you mean if we charge, we could earn $20 million for the county coffers?" I was like, no. That's not what the intent of this. But it was to show that this is a benefit for all the users of the trail. So I actually use the trail myself quite often, and a couple of years ago, I've been the Girl Scout leader for my daughter's troop, and we were camping out on a campsite that's not too far from the trail. And at the time, the girls all decided that they were vegetarian, and so we were cooking tofu dogs over the campfire. Well, we found out the hard way that tofu dogs do not stay on the sticks. And they all fell in the fire, and we burned the buns, and we also burned the beans. So we basically had no dinner, and I had a lot of very unhappy campers. But I knew that I was very close to the Perkiomen Trail. So I marched our troop up the trail to the gateway community of Schwenksville, and we had pizza and french fries at Mokia's Diner. And we spent all of our cookie money, but I had a lot of happy campers. So, and we also added to the economic vitality of the gateway community along the Perkiomen Trail. So we did our part. The other case study that I want to talk about is Hopewell Big Woods, which I also mentioned before. It's a big 73,000 acre area that's mostly or largely unfragmented on the border of Chester and Berks County. And it's a big attraction. It's about an hour and a half drive for 6 million people, and it's a big attraction. We've got Hopewell Furnace there, French Creek State Park, a number of other destinations. It's an important bird animal, an important mammal area. There's lots of things going on there. Next one. So we looked at just the environmental benefits of that area, the 73,000 acres, and for that we calculated that the environmental benefits of just those 73,000 acres, because it's so wooded, is about $47 million every year. A large part of that comes from the carbon sequestration and air pollution removal benefits. The other one I want to talk about briefly is Clark Park, and I know that Clark Park is this 9-acre park in West Philadelphia that's very different from the kind of landscape you have up here, but I want to still talk about it because Clark Park is a destination in that community. They have a ton of events all year round that attract people to the park. They have a farmer's market, festivals, music, lots of babysitting clubs go there just to meet and the mothers get together. And it's so popular. It's only 9 acres, but it gets 600,000 people per year. And it's a great civic attraction. And because of the civic attraction and all the people that congregate there, it's actually spilled over into economic benefits for the surrounding blocks. So lots of coffee shops and restaurants and stores have all sprouted up just because of this very small park in West Philadelphia. Peace Valley Park is a big county park in Bucks County. It was created originally for flood control and drinking water purposes by creating a dam on Lake Galena. And they've got a lot of activities there, a nature center that attracts a lot of school groups. And their boating area, the lake, is not only providing flood control and drinking water, but it's a big source of revenue for the county park department by charging fees for boating and boating lessons. So it actually provides the county park department about $100,000 a year in revenue, which helps them maintain the rest of their parks. Honeybrook Township's our last case study, and that is a big farming community, again in Chester County near the border of Lancaster County. And Honeybrook is special because what they've done, it's a very large township, and they've preserved a lot of farms within the township, and they've clustered them with the benefit that the more clustering you have, the better you're protecting your prime ag soils and also supporting those ag support businesses, which in turn make the farms more profitable. It's also at the headwaters of Brandywine Creek, which is a source of drinking water for the city of Wilmington downstream. And because there are a lot of dairy farms in Honeybrook, Wilmington is very concerned about their water quality. So the drinking water utility has actually paid the farmers in Honeybrook Township to practice best management practices so that they can have cleaner water as it flows downstream. So where do we go from here? Well, first I would encourage you to read the report. I have a summary brochure out on the tables out there called Return on Environment. But if you're interested in more information, we have the full report, which is accessed here, and it's also, the link is on the brochure. Recognize the value. Next time you go out to an open space, either your favorite one or a new one, take a look around with some fresh eyes and notice, for example, the ecosystem benefits that you might not have noticed before, or notice the health and recreation benefits that people are enjoying. Maybe even notice the economic activity. Maybe you're actually spending money when you're out there, or you notice other people spending money and helping the local economy. Share the story. We think it's a really good story for people to understand the economic value of open space, but we need to play it forward, so we encourage you to share it. Support open space initiatives, whether it's at the state or local level. This open space can't happen without a variety of sources of funding, and a lot of that funding comes from public sources, so we need to support both state and local funding programs. In our region, we've actually really put our money where I know that I have thrown a lot of numbers at you, and I don't expect you to remember any of them. If you need to cite them, they're there in the report. But the one message that I would like you to take away with you is that open spaces are more than just pretty places. They are wise public investments that pay us back. And with that, that's the end.
Maybe about 5 minutes for some quick questions, and then we'll move on to next.
How did you get the utilities involved with that ag cluster, supporting the BNPs, covering the cost of the BNPs?
We didn't. We just noted that it actually happened. So I guess the utility in Wilmington has recognized that it's cost effective to prevent the pollution before it starts.
That was the city of Wilmington.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. No other questions?
I have one. It's just how did you count the number of visits and whatever else in terms of the parks and the trails and whatever else, especially at the circuit? I mean, given all points of access.
Yes. Well, there's a couple things going on there. some of the trails have, they have people that go out and survey, and then they've extrapolated. So if they have, so many people that go out on one Saturday in the summer, they may have, extrapolated that to be equal to every Saturday and then added it up. But we also now have bike and pedestrian counters that we're putting out, so we can actually get a more accurate count. And it's like some kind of infrared device that picks up heat as it walks by. And so it actually is an actual count, and we're hoping to install some permanent counters so that we can actually get year-round counts and then use that calibration to estimate other places and what the counts are there too. Okay, thanks.
You could stand out there if you want.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to talk a little bit about the Trailtown program and Progress Fund and Trailtown communities and how it kind of all works together, matching the natural environment, recreation, and economic development. So first off, how many people have heard of the Great Allegheny Passage Trail? Okay, how many have been on it? Okay, 2. So just a little background on the Great Allegheny Passage. It is abandoned railroad lines, the Pittsburgh and Lake Erie, which travel from Pittsburgh to Connellsville, and the Western Maryland Railroad, which travels from Connellsville to Cumberland, Maryland. And now that is 150 miles of non-motorized trail, hiking, biking, equestrian, and some snowshoeing as well. The first section started in 1986 at what is now Ohio Pal State Park. It was approximately about 10 miles from Ohio Pal to Confluence, and year by year, piece by piece, mile by mile, it's been built across Maryland and Pennsylvania. We're almost done. The last few miles in the Mon Valley of Pittsburgh have been under construction, and the final link between Homestead and the south side neighborhood of downtown Pittsburgh are being connected, and we are having a big celebration June 15th that the trail will go all the way from the Point State Park all the way to Washington, D.C. It connects with the C&O Canal towpath, which it starts through Cumberland through Washington, D.C., which is a National Historical Park, and together that's a 335 miles of continuous trail connecting 2 major cities in the United States. It's also one of the National Scenic Trails. There's 11 in the United States, and that is the Potomac Heritage National Scenic Trail, a collection of trails throughout the greater Potomac River area, a little bit of George Washington history and so forth. It is highly honored and recognized. A lot of major publications, both nationally and internationally, have caught the attention. New York Times, Washington Post, USA Today, and so forth. It's the first trail in the Rail Trail Hall of Fame. And last fall, it was named one of the top 10 fall destinations by National Geographic. Of those 10, there was only about 2 or 3 in the United States, and this was one of them. So here's a map of the trail system. Pittsburgh, right there, the 3 rivers, the Allegheny, Monongahela, and Ohio there. And it travels through to the Mon, where it meets the Youghiogheny River in McKeesport, and continues into the Laurel Highlands. And the communities I work in, we work in 6 communities in Pennsylvania: West Newton, Connellsville, Ohio Pal, Confluence, Rockwood, and Myersdale, and also 2 in Maryland, Frostburg, and Cumberland. And so you can see from Pittsburgh to Cumberland, you have the Great Allegheny Passage, and then from Cumberland to D.C., the C&O Canal. So we are connecting Pittsburgh to our nation's capital. There's a lot of stories and unique features along the way. Most of the trail is in the forest. This is your typical trail scene. This is an abandoned railroad, so it's a flat trail, about 1% grade the whole way through. And along the way, you enter small towns and communities that once were thriving industrial centers that are now trail towns. For example, here you have Myersdale train station. That train station has been transformed into a visitor center. you have a lot of rail structures, and most of the trail is made of limestone, fresh limestone, but there are sections that are paved as well. Like I said, former railroad corridor, so there are a lot of railroad structures that cost a lot to restore as well. This one is the Salisbury Viaduct near Myersdale, just about 1,000 feet long. Also, there's tunnels and smaller bridges along the way that show these great views that are once these railroad corridors and railroad structures that are now seeing thousands of trail users yearly. And all along the way, we have these beautiful landscapes. This is coming outside the Big Savage Tunnel, which is about a $12 million project that kind of really made the effort to connect these two states through trail. And from here, I think you have views of Pennsylvania, West Virginia, Maryland, and maybe Virginia. But huge landscape there as you come through the tunnel. So a little bit more about my organization, the Progress Fund. We are a non-profit established in 1997, and we are a community development financial institution, CDFI for short. We have a we have a focus on rural development throughout the region. If you pick up one of our brochures here, you can see where our range is and so forth, and some of the businesses that we have provided loans to over the years. But we provide capital and business coaching to entrepreneurs focused on tourism and agriculture, which also happen to be the top two industries in Pennsylvania. And like I said, we work throughout Appalachian, Ohio, all of West Virginia, most of Pennsylvania, and Western England. So here's our entire range where we work in. Each of these dots represent a loan that was done by the Progress Fund since 1997. And here you can see, again, the Great Allegheny Passage and the CNO. We saw major focus for opportunity of tourism development along the trail. So you can see a lot of our trail businesses there, but also in that booklet. And going on with more about Progress Fund, we act like a bank, even though we're nonprofit. Can we go back? Because a lot of the businesses that we provide financing to lodging, overnight accommodations, campgrounds, restaurants, bars, not your typical bank loan. They're not going to take the risk with a overnight accommodation or putting, financing rafts to go into the river. So that's where we kind of stand out in the tourism and agriculture industries. So the Trailtown program is a special initiative of the Progress Fund, and the concept dates back to 2001. A lot of partners involved in trail building, state agencies, tourism promotions, economic developers, and so forth, kind of got together. Hey, we have, close to 100 miles here. We see people are coming in. How can we take advantage of this trail? So in 2005, the Trailtown Manual was published through the Allegheny Trail Alliance, who maintains the trail, and it's basically a how to be a trail town, what type of things to look for, what type of things to implement. And as a plan, we didn't want to just sit on the shelf, so we raised funds to develop this program and staff it. 2007, Trailtown program was launched in the 6 communities from West Newton to Myersdale and expanded into Maryland in 2009. Since 2007, we've monitored the number of business openings and closings. So roughly about 50 new businesses net have opened since 2007, seeing the impact in each of the communities. Roughly, at this point, probably about 20 have expanded or changed hands. And those that were new businesses are expanded, 23% were Progress Fund borrowers, and they're all still in operation. And from that, over $4.5 million in loans, another $1.5 in private investment. So why was the Trailtown program created? Ultimately, it recognized the trail's economic potential would be maximized without a regional concentrated effort. Having staff and regional partners come together to identify the trail and opportunities that go along with it. It provides a rallying point for these small local communities to kind of look at opportunities, how they can take advantage and develop becoming a trail town and bring more businesses back. Our ultimate goals are, number one, to encourage business development, whether that be new or expansion of businesses, really focusing on the trail market. The trail might have a bigger impact on some businesses such as lodging or bike shops, but other cases it can make a small improvement or bring new business that you might normally have in a community without a trail. Identify and fill service gaps. When you go on vacation or travel, there's a few things you need: place to stay, place to eat, you need bike repair. We look at each of the communities and see what exists today and what's still needed. So if one town only has 1 or 2 B&Bs, there's definitely an opportunity for more. Also, ultimately attract visitors to the trail and into the towns, have them spend time and money in the communities, leaving their impact along the trail. And ultimately support sustainable development while building healthy, livable communities. What's done for the trail towns, whether it's a trail business or improvements to infrastructure, it ultimately helps the local community in the long run. So we hear a lot about partnerships, and there's lots of partnerships on all different levels here with the Trail Town program. At the local level, we work with our borrowers and local businesses, business groups. Several of the communities have a merchants association, Main Street programs. Two of our communities, West Newton and Myersville, had an existing Main Street program, and they now operate as a volunteer basis, but we try to match their vision along with the Trail Town program vision. And your local and county governments. On the regional effort, we obviously work with those who build the trail, the Allegheny Trail Alliance. Also, our regional visitors bureau, Laurel Highlands Visitor Bureau, helps market the trail along with Visit Pittsburgh. They have collaborated with us, but also with each other, to create a single utilized language that markets the trail on the same message, giving a message to both visitors and locals what the trail is about and what it's for. Local universities, small business development corporate centers. We have St. Vincent's and Chatham in our area, so a lot of the times when people are interested in opening a business or getting business plans idea, we recommend them to go through them to help work out that business plan. Also foundations and commercial banks. On the state level, DCNR and DCED, a lot of our funding for programming, but also projects has come through that way. And in Maryland, the Department of Planning is how the Trail Town program is operated through Maryland. On the national level, Appalachian Regional Commission, the Student Conservation Association, National Park, these have been partners throughout the program. Student Conservation Association provides intern programming to implement several of our projects throughout the communities. So how do trail towns get started? First off, trail towns are a destination on a long distance trail. And what do you do? How do you get started? How do you implement being a trail town? So as part of that trail town manual, there's a checklist known as the trail town assessment. It is a self-look at your community. What positive, what negatives are there? 3 major areas of traffic and access, business and design are all reviewed. Whether how far is the trail from your town? Is it wayfinding, sign issues, what type of businesses are there? And how does the overall appearance of town look to a visitor? And from this assessment, it creates a priority, both at a town level, but also regional level. For example, this was one of the first projects identified in Connellsville. This was formerly a rusted old caboose, yellow, just kind of sitting there. The idea was, well, maybe it could be this, or maybe an ice cream shop. Something's got to be done. So from that priority list, it was identified to rehab this caboose, and it now acts as a welcome center to visitors on the trail. Projects in the Trail Towns. The ultimate goal of the Trail Town program is to connect the trail to the towns and to each other. Thinking on a largely regional level, not just thinking about just Connellsville, but just West Newton. their neighbors. Someone doing a full trip is going to stop in one town and also the other. Economic research, which I'll go a little bit more into detail. And then direct business assistance and lending. Someone is interested in opening a B&B, or they want to open a business in a certain town. We help provide them with the Progress Fund loan program, but also provide them market information. Trail-wide marketing, this happens various ways, newsletters, social media, and I'll get into a few more examples here shortly. And then real estate development. On our website, we identify available properties. Those are for sale or for rent, so we can match the entrepreneur with a building or a property in the trail towns. So again, here's a few examples of those projects. We've done a couple sign grants for businesses, a matching sign grant where they receive a grant to match up to 50% for new signage to create a more aesthetically pleasing entry to their business or to town. Here at the bottom, Trail Town Art. One of the first projects that were kind of implemented on a regional level was Trail Town Art. Each of the locations received a piece of public art, whether it be mural or a sculpture, and things like that, to kind of show their town identity, but also create gateway pieces into the community. This is a great example here in Rockwood. One of the challenges for the trail towns is sometimes the trail is on one side, but downtown is on the other. So you literally have to cross the bridge to get to the business district. So this was formerly a blank white wall right on the corner of the bridge, and has been transformed into this welcome mat that tells a story of Rockwood, its heritage and its history. So these have been created as gateway projects and get people interested in learning about the local heritage, these unique communities. I mentioned brochures. We have a series of brochures for each of the communities that include lodging options, dining options, attractions. And they all have a similar feel and look, so that when you're in one town, you can see all the options and pick up these brochures and plan your trip. And they're not, Myersdale is not just sent to Myersdale. We send a combo of them all to each of the trailheads, businesses, and major marketing outlets to show that when I'm in Myersdale, I can pick up Ohio Pal and plan ahead, and also give these to businesses so they can learn more what's in the other towns as people ask them, well, where can I stay in Connellsville, etc. Also bike racks. Small objects, small infrastructure, but has a big impact. At trailheads, businesses, it shows that they're trail friendly, they're welcoming trail users to their community or to their business. Also signage. Signage is always a big issue, but one of the first projects of the partnership between the Allegheny Trail Alliance and the Trail Town program is creating a sign guidelines that is wayfinding and informational standards, so that when you have a consistency across the whole entire trail. So when you see the Great Allegheny Passage logo and the mileage markers, they all have the same look and feel, so I know I didn't make a wrong turn on the trail and so forth. Things from kiosks to totem for trail access, from what's north and what's south, and icons. Those were some of the first things that were implemented and continue to be upgraded so that it has the same look and feel across the entire trail. We often hold networking events in the top right corner to bring businesses together from across the trail. They've been thematic, from lodging to bike shops to sustainability efforts, just to get people together to talk about what they see from different perspectives of trail users, what trail users are looking for and what they're dealing with, and how we can make improvements as a whole region. And finally, in the middle there, great idea, but it hasn't really worked out in the long run. One of the businesses in Rockwood created a unique flavor for ice cream called Rockwood. Kind of getting people to think about Rockwood and the community and their experience. So from that grew the idea to create a flavor for each of the communities. So for example, West Newton created Yacht Nest Monster, and Myersdale is Maple City Marble. Different things based on the natural resources, the history. Cherry Rapid Delight in Ohio Pal is for George Washington as he came into the area. But this is a way to think more regionally, so that you can stop in one town and the next and try out the flavors. We've had some issues where for about 2-3 years we were doing self-delivery, but it wasn't sustainable, and made an approach to get an ice cream producer to produce and deliver, but we haven't been successful in that yet. But it's a nice way to think about branding your community, branding as a region. At a previous conference, there was an idea, how can small communities or small trail systems latch on and bring people in? And someone said ice cream and fudge. Simple things that bring people into your community. So economic research, that's probably one of the most important things from a business perspective, and knowing your market, that is valuable to our entire region, the entire trail system. So we have a series of electronic counters on the trail that we help gather that data and review it each year. So 2002, roughly 347,000 trips were taken on the Great Allegheny Passage. And about in the last 2 years, it's been roughly 800,000. We saw the increase as connections were made. In 2006, a major connection, the Big Savage Tunnel into Maryland, increased the market from the DC-Baltimore area, creating a longer trail and more ridership. Also, we do different types of intercept surveys over the years to learn more of how these all work together. We need to know who our users are. So things like zip code, whether they're a local rider or a through rider, are they doing a 4 or 5 day trip? Are they going across the country, or are they just doing their weekly bike ride on the trail? Finding out where they start, where they end, start to see patterns, where people are coming from, where they're stopping overnight. Age, ultimately, who is our main market area, who's the trail user. And we've learned pretty much consistency that about 50% of the trail users are in the range of 45 to 65 years old. Group size, are they going solo? Are they traveling as a family vacation? It affects how they plan their trip, if they're going solo or if they need to book an entire B&B. How they use the trail, ultimately it's biking, but also do they use it for exercise, bird watching, access to the river, things like that. And in the long run, what are they spending? Are they grabbing lunch? Are they staying overnight? Things like that. Lodging, what type of lodging are they staying at? Anything from a campground to a hostel to a boutique hotel or a hotel, B&B, or a combination of all of those. And ultimately, how do they find out about the trail? Word of mouth, one of the national publications, have they been using it the whole time, or how do they find out, how do they get to the trail? So like I said, we've done several surveys. Previous studies in 1998 through 2011 was our most recent, where we interviewed roughly 1,200 trail users in 2011 and then in 2012 we followed up with a business survey. So from those previous surveys, we saw a change in increase of direct spending on the trail. 2002, roughly 7 million. 2008, with those connections made and more trail users on the trail, nearly 40 million in direct spending. It's believed that roughly 50 million at this stage. So for the trail survey, we chose 11 locations, 11 main trailheads from Homestead to Cumberland. From July to October, collected the surveys, and in the end, Frostburg State analyzed those results. What we found from that survey is roughly 3/4 of those who were interviewed were from Pennsylvania. And those 1,200 surveys represented roughly 2,800 people. Like I said, most trail users are 35 years or older, and 22% of them are first-time users, meaning they've come to the trail for the first time ever. And when we did the survey in 2008, it was also, again, roughly 20%. Also finding out, doing surveys myself, people may have used the Ohio House section for a long time, but now they're discovering different sections and different parts or doing the whole thing for the first time. Most people travel in pairs, and for the most part, and then spending, the average individual, just your average day rider, might spend about $17, maybe lunch, maybe some drinks or snacks. In groups, roughly $50 for the day users. Overnight visitors, really people coming to visit the area, visit the trail, that's where we see the big impact. So in 2011, roughly 20% of all trail users were planning an overnight stay. What type of accommodations? Most people are looking for an indoor lodging facility, largely B&Bs, followed by hotels. One thing we learned from people planning their trip is they think there's a hotel in every town. Very untrue. They kind of just go with the flow and then they have to find out what's happening. Then we have camping, and then a mix of indoor and camping, but also people that come, just to ride the trail and visit family as well. The average overnight stay is roughly $114 a stay. And also 82% are planning to spend more than 2 nights or more. They spend, maybe they do an entire trail trip, or maybe they go see other attractions such as falling water and things like that. And 16% doing 1 night stay, maybe a nice long weekend or just a trip out of the way. And we've learned that visitors have come from all over the globe. We know we've hit all 6 continents, but I think we've hit Antarctica as well. As one of our surveys, someone was studying down there. So this is a map or a globe from one of the businesses that has marked each season where people are coming from. The bike shop, the visitor center, they keep logs of where people come from, what they think of the trail, they think of their business, and so forth. From our business surveys, I know we talked a little bit about seasonal businesses along the way, and that is still very much a challenge, but 23 of 88 that responded said they closed for more than 2 weeks, most commonly in the winter. We've seen that often, usually January, February, some businesses do close for a week or 2. On average, about 30% of gross revenues were attributed to the trail. So the trail is having an impact on all businesses, whether it's more of a lodging situation or a bike shop. Obviously they have more trail users, but also the coffee shop or a small retail is seeing more of a trail user each year. 30% of those surveyed plan to expand. And of those who are planning to expand, about half of them agreed that the trail impacted that decision to expand. So what are some factors to success for trails and trail towns? Access to capital for improvement and projects, a trail long enough to visit. As we've seen with the connections made on the Great Allegheny Passage, starting from 10 miles the first time in 1986 to 335 continuous miles, that's what attracts people to the area. The community character, identifying what makes your town unique, whether it be historic or through the landscape and things like that, sharing that with people and giving them a reason to connect with the community. Also, a local culture that embraces trails. Like our previous presenter said, they didn't want the trails. A great example was Confluence. They did not want the trail in their community. They made t-shirts, no trails, and now they've transformed and have probably about 10, 15 lodging properties, and it's really transformed the community. So that's all I have for right now. If there's any questions.
Have you had much experience with the debate between maintaining rail lines for economic development versus turning them into trails and kind of evaluating that and the pros and cons and everything, because we have debates going on.
Through our program, we haven't had a lot to deal with that. The Allegheny Trail Alliance has done most of the trail building. But we have seen from previous, another project we're working on for building a regional trail network, is that there aren't a whole lot of abandoned railroads left in our region. So we're looking at options, whether it's trail and rail, or what's the route. So I can't really say if there's been studies on that, but generally it's focused on the trail, but also on the other side of the river, there's still an active rail line, CSX. So we have CSX and Amtrak that continue to run on the opposite side of the trail.
So how do you convert people who are not interested in change to change along with this program?
That's a good question. From a business side, we have some, what we call a Trail Town Certified Business Program. And it's been a merger of a sustainable business program and a trail friendly program. And kind of just educating the local businesses about the trail, learning more about it and where these people are coming from and what they're spending, kind of opens their eyes to, well, maybe I can have a trail package or encourage more trail businesses to come through marketing and things like that. As for communities, as the trail comes through, I think that was the challenge. It was a little overpromised along, when it first came through, but now they're starting to see the impact. They'll eventually get it. They'll see the trail users come through, but it just takes time. The change in that, and seeing small projects can make a difference, whether it's signage or more bike racks or a new business that is largely trail based. They can see the impact there.
Is your first connection usually with the governing body of municipalities or with the business group?
In what form?
Well,
For trail building
in
or?
regard to answer, well, no, not
Okay.
for the business, getting the business community on board, and for the township.
Yeah.
Is your first conversation usually with the township administrator or mayor or a councilman, or is it with the business group?
It's a bit of a case-by-case situation. Some towns have, the trail is a bigger piece of the community than others, or has more impact in some communities. For some infrastructure improvements and things like that, it's more of a partnership between those who are maintaining it, the trail group, and the municipality. But on the business side, it's interested entrepreneurs, kind of giving them more market information or more trail-friendly implementation programs and things like that.
So you do have to work
Yeah.
on that side.
So, for example, let's see, Rockwood and West Newton, they have a population of, they have a smaller population and they're a smaller community. So the trail has a bigger impact and they see more trail users versus Cumberland and Connellsville. They have bigger populations and larger communities and in both size and population. So the trail is a piece, of that puzzle. But looking at a larger picture, the infrastructure improvements are, is it roads or the trail? It can vary.
Any problems with motorized vehicles getting into trails, and how do you determine?
There has been some like ATV areas. I think when the trail was first, as they were building it, that was one thing they made sure they did not include. So I've heard examples where one day there's motorized allowed. But there's been issues of crossing the trail and so forth, and that's between the trail groups and the local landowner. Nothing major, but it does disrupt the condition of the trail in those sections.
We have time for one more question.
So what we have in our area are a lot of small rail to trail, but there's not this connectivity between all the rails to trails. So, like you have a contiguous area that you can go, I don't know how many miles you can go on one stretch.
150 is on the cap.
150, right. So if we have, you know, a little bit on the O&W trail in one town and a little bit in another trail in another town, what would your suggestion be in terms of, you have this overriding entity that was created as a business entity, an economic development entity that would link all of these disparate trails to create one trail? Or, I mean, I don't know, it's sort of like the chicken and the egg kind of thing.
I would say the ultimate goal would be to make those connections as possible between the trail systems, but also maybe a better program to kind of market the trail system as one name, you know, the X County rail trails, so they can explore and kind of create these packages where they can maybe do this section of trail, maybe see another attraction, then do another trail, you know, as part of that vacation package or things like that. And getting some businesses involved where they can stay here one night, do this other trail, and here's what you can do in that area. So identifying what trails there are, first off, you know, names and where they're at, what businesses that might appeal to trail users are, and, you know, creating maybe a singular marketing term or name for this regional trail system.
Thank you.